Good afternoon and welcome to Navigating the Blizzard, one of our series, one of our webinars in the series that we have been doing over the last few weeks as the world has been going through a really interesting time. We've called it the Navigating the Blizzard for a couple of reasons, because we believe it's through. We believe the most important word for business at the moment is to really think through what we are going and what we are stuck in at the moment. And so part of our topic theme that we're trying to provide for people is to really think about, what do we do in this time of COVID? What do we do in this time of pandemic? And really to think deeply. And we work at board level with many companies, and I think the key thing is to really think through and decide the way forward. We hope that through these seminars, these webinars, we can help you determine the next steps in your business. And the next step we're going to be talking about today is we're going to be talking about the digital journey. Where I'm in South Africa, and I stay in Pretoria, and in South Africa we've recently opened up a lot of the online e-commerce, and so that's one of the areas a lot of businesses have to look at. What elements does that bring? But it's not just the front end of our business that can be digitized. It's also our offerings and a lot of those things. So we're going to be in conversation today with a digital strategist, Eleanor Hitchcock, and I'll introduce you to her in a couple of minutes. But it's really thinking through the next steps in the business, thinking through the implications and impact. And so the conversations are meant to be wide-ranging and open, to open our ideas and our thoughts up in terms of that, and really take the decisions, because one of the critical dangers in a crisis is that we don't take the decisions and implement the decisions we need to. And so a lot of our businesses are doing elements of this, but it's really positioning ourselves to see this thing through. As we go through the webinar, please feel free to engage with us on either the question and answer box or the chat box, and I'll be monitoring those as we go and directing your questions through to Eleanor as we go. A couple of foundation stones first in terms of the role of the board is that one of the critical themes that has emerged in the last decade around the role of the board, especially in South Africa with the likes of the King Codes of Corporate Governance, they've started to address the issue of IT and ICT at board level. And essentially it's that the governing body, the board of a company, should actually think through what the link between strategy and IT is. And often there's this disconnect, and I think Eleanor will be able to give us some tips in terms of how to link that up. And what that boils down to ultimately is that the board's role is to really set the strategy and direction for the deployment of IT. And this is no longer just a single function in a business. Actually, ICT, IT, and obviously the information, communications, and technology, it's every part of our business. IT isn't just a tool we use, but our businesses they run on, it's embedded in our businesses. Overseeing the architecture and integration of ICT into the business model. And so we'll unpack some of those elements, I'm sure. So how have companies done that? And we really want to answer those questions as we go. IT obviously has got risk elements, and the pandemic has opened up, catalyzed a lot of opportunities, but also those have led to challenges. A specific example I heard of recently was a bank in Ghana that had tripled their online banking footprint almost overnight in the first 30 days. They'd anticipated growing in that area, but it opened up some huge security issues because their systems didn't anticipate. We're on Zoom at the moment, and Zoom went from, under 100 million users to over 300 million users in 30 days. And we've seen them iterate some of these challenges and then really assess the value of ICT. ICT costs money. It's an investment. And we need to make sure that we're investing in the right areas. And I know that Eleanor will be able to point us in the direction there in terms of what to look at in terms of digital and your business. So it is going to be a conversation, but Eleanor's going to be driving it. Eleanor, if you could introduce yourself, give us a little bit of your background, and then lay the foundation on what we're going to talk about.
Yeah, sure. Hi there, everybody. Lovely that you've joined us. I've had 25 years in IT, in ICT, essentially looking after as a program manager and project manager, and looking at digital strategies as well, informing boards, and basically from automotive industry to telecoms to launching huge, enormous digital initiatives, and basically looking at how companies should be architecting their digital journeys, and just making sure that they get the value at the end of the day that they require from their boards. So kind of my background, and today I hope you're going to gain something from this. B is digital, and it's extremely relevant now in the boardroom. Yeah. So
Look at what
just
the
in terms of
challenges,
our
obviously.
challenges going forward, yeah, I think we're in an unprecedented time. I mean, somebody says, please wake me up when things become precedented again. And I think that's so true. We'd love to be precedented. But just in terms of that, we in this time where IT budgets are going to probably be cut, and we're going to have to live with new targets. But at the same time, we've got huge pressure to reinvest in some cutting edge digital solutions. So in terms of this, we really look at two prongs. The one is really automation of your and digitization of your backbone. So that would really be, for instance, your traditional supply chain, ERP, HR kind of systems, and you know, your CRM systems, and maybe a bit of and e-commerce, although e-commerce falls into kind of two brackets, and really looking at that backbone and operationalizing it, making sure we've got efficiencies and we've got insights, and there on that backbone we would maybe launch something like your analytics on top of it to get additional insights into what the data that's coming out of those processes. And the other area is business process management. Now, this is really about your digital events. So if you take a business process and you want to create digital value across your core systems, which are the ones I mentioned, like your ERP, etc., and your e-commerce, now you're linking these processes to mobile apps. You might link them to IoT data, the Internet of Things, some drones. You might include some augmented reality for these repeatable processes. And that's basically a second place to look when it comes to a digital journey.
If we think of it, and I think obviously the challenge at the moment is we look at our businesses, these two prongs that are intertwined, but where do we start? Because we're facing this thing called COVID.
Yeah, we are. We're facing COVID, and yeah, COVID. Far, let's say we've got a shift worker. There are solutions out there. So there are, for instance, heat-sensitive shields one can use, which has got IoT data, which integrates with your clocking system. So essentially, if a worker arrives and they have a temperature, then it's not going to allow them onto the plant, and there's also Kronos and a few other tools have got specifically software designed around shifts, and this shift software makes sure that there's social distancing. So they stagger the shifts, and they allow people required for social distance. Most likely, your COVID-19 status, like am I infected, am I not, can be just incorporated in your employee record. And if I'm on a shift, then the people that are on the shift with me, obviously I can go and test those people and make sure that they're clean from that perspective. So those are the kind of shift worker approaches. When it comes to homebound office workers, we're all doing home-based work, and I mean, on that case, there are guys, I know of a few companies that have just launched apps and surveys, and they say, which are integrated to their HR systems. And, you know, should an employee on the app say, I've got these 4 symptoms, then the HR knows that that particular employee might be at risk, and they can intervene. Yeah, and I must say, we're struggling, some of us, to get a cadence at home. So I think a cadence of work, of when to do what, and what's expected of us. And there are tools which ensure that you are very goal focused and increase the level of engagement in the team. And the things like Slack, which was an agile tool, but works on a daily basis, in Monday.com, which also gives you kind of goals that you can look at and collaborate and engage with your manager. So don't have fuzzy conversations, have conversations around work and what is expected of you, and just to make sure the team is aligned, you know. And those kind of things, what a nice time right now is to launch a bit of what I call a digital curriculum. So a digital curriculum is just basically, in terms of my particular job role, what would be the most valid digital applications or tools that are required of me to understand and to get to grips with. I mean, a bit form a bit of camaraderie around that.
Yeah, Eleanor, I just want to quickly, your internet
great,
is breaking up a little bit. And so what we want to do is we want to just shift, if you wouldn't mind just staying online for, I'm just going to quickly stop my video, mute everybody. If you wouldn't mind staying on for 2 or 3 minutes, we're just going to set up an alternative, we'll be back on shortly. And I also see that I'm also going to stop the share and reshare the screen to do that. All right.
Cool. Yeah.
It may reconnect you, eh? You may need to just Zoom should do it automatically.
Hi guys, are we back?
Hi there. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your patience. It would happen during a digital webinar, so it seems to be the way that it is. I trust you can hear me. Thanks for engaging, and back to you, Eleanor.
Yeah. So I was just talking about employees and making sure that the cadence and the goal setting is there. And what's basically, if we make sure that people are looking at their digital curriculums. Yeah, the key there is really to make sure that people are not intimidated by this, and that we get teams to help each other and make it accessible, and that in a sense that learning approach is more collaborative. I think that is quite helpful. Any digital journey requires that there's a people journey as well, and that people journey is across all digital initiatives. That is really important to have a specialist or a capability that understands tools such as ADCAR. Now, ADCAR is all about building awareness, desire, knowledge of the particular digital capability, and then ultimately an aptitude and have some repetition. And this really ups the level of the entire organization if you can get them onto some kind of curriculum and make, especially while we're in lockdown, I think it's quite valuable.
In terms of, so that's looking at some of the bigger picture things, I suppose, and some of the immediate, looking
Yes.
at some, let's pick up and say, well, where does one start, especially in this digital journey at the moment?
Well, because we are where we are, and we are, I think, the world, they're looking at GDP shrinking by, I don't know, 6% or something, or so that's why I say let's eliminate some expenses first before we decide on, and at the same time we decide where we can invest and create a strategy and a roadmap. And on that strategy and roadmap, we're obviously setting goals. So how do we eliminate expenses and where do we look? There's a lot of great places to look, especially at your contract. So if you've got a service level agreement, how can this maybe renegotiated and look at that particular service, the level of service you really required. Sometimes we need to also look at our consultants that we're using. Can we insource those consultants? Some aspects of our business are actually better to outsource, so you start to restructure things. We look at our end dates on software licenses, because there's a lot of software sometimes that we can renegotiate in terms of those end dates. Sometimes if we negotiate longer periods of time, we can get a better discount. In other cases, we really want to decommission stuff because it's not serving our purposes. I always look at best of breed and best of class. Now, best in breed is, for instance, if I'm a logistics company and I happen to be and that is my key competence, then I look for software that is really best of breed for logistics. But I don't need huge functionality as regards my finance and my those things. I need standard software. So the fit between functionality that I actually use, and I mean, we all use our cell phones, and we all say we only use actually 15% of the actual capability, or maybe 20%. It's the same with software. How much of that software capability do we really use? And can we go for either a smaller product or do we need a better product? So
I suppose one of the questions here is we often sit with software that does a lot more than we actually use it for.
exactly.
And that's what you're alluding to, is really we need to do almost an audit of what we have available to us, because maybe we've got multiple licenses to do the same thing.
They're often duplicates. And that's often the case. And the best place to look is actually in your finances, because you're paying for these contracts. So, I mean, I've actually seen consultants come in, and it takes them 6 months to do a flipping software audit, So, I mean, which is ridiculous. And the other thing vendors love to do is they love to bundle software. And then you're buying a piece of software you don't need, and it's taking up energy to maintain, and it's actually costing you. So focus on what you really need. There's always places to save. And then in terms of the truth tellers in your business, now the truth tellers are your C-level management and your managers. And when you charge software to their cost centers, they'll quickly tell you, listen, this is of no value to me, or I'm not willing to pay for this. Okay, so
yeah, and I think that's often a symptom. And so, I mean, it's a very practical place to start, is it? And it doesn't necessarily involve your IT, it involves everybody. To say, that point, they allocate the charges to everybody, and then the usefulness, people want to pay for what they're using. And it's a good way to get more eyes on the system, because I think that's often what it is we think that the only eyes on the system are the IT eyes. Well, let's get everybody's eyes on the system.
Exactly, yeah. So, and you should have some kind of measure as to savings. Okay, in terms of, once we've looked at that, we can also assess our overall strategy, and you might be in one of three places as a business. You may require a digital leap. Now, what do we mean by digital leap? That is sometimes when we have solutions that are suboptimal, they're old, the versions are old, they're actually quite costly to maintain, they're not integrated, it's a mess, it's a spaghetti. We need something cohesive, and we need something that can keep us going in this new era across also the different generations that look at your system, your generation X, millennials, your younger generation. So, so we want normally some kind of cloud solution that we can deploy. And when we look at that type of cloud solution, you mentioned in the intro some e-commerce. I mean, that can bring enormous value right now. If you haven't got an e-commerce solution, and you get guys that actually host your e-commerce platform for you, they look after your security, they look after your analytics, they maintain the site, they make sure that you're getting a ton of value from, and it can be up and running quite quickly, so you can get huge value there. So you might have a digital leap is one of the traditional HR systems or supply chain e-commerce, as I've said. So normally that digital leap is quite a sizable investment sometimes, especially if it's ERP or CRM solutions. And those are really investments which the board need to see the value in those, and they need to track that business case. So the board would say, what value are we capturing through this digital leap, and how are we supporting our strategy, and what are the outcomes? Because it's quite a sizable investment. The next kind of strategy is really sometimes where we want to actually, in a sense, get more cost savings, but over the longer term. And here we're looking for low-hanging fruit where we can get the most value and can bring us the most revenue ultimately. And we're looking at that revenue versus costs to be gained, and obviously we evaluate risk. And we might bundle these together and make a program and roll that program out. But we're going to get something that's going to give us value. Then the third strategy is really looking at the art of the possible.
And this is where I think a lot of people look at IT and say, wow, I think there's an interesting mix now. There's the forward-looking innovation, but actually we need to be looking at innovation that'll change our businesses to survive. So there's an interesting, we often think of all of the possible as out there, but actually I think there's a mix between that and also what do we work with our existing businesses.
Yeah, exactly. And the art of the possible can never be too big or too small. So I'm going to mention quite a few examples, because I think these are the things that are going to stimulate your imaginations and get you into the right frame of mind when you look at digital journeys. Now, there's something called digital twinning, and that's the sizable things. That's something like Siemens does. They look at your whole manufacturing process, they look at the product, and they make a digital twin of your manufacturing process and the flows that run through it. And they can look at the usage from cradle to grave of your particular product, how it's used, and then provide analytics in terms of better design, etc. Now, those are large enormous undertakings, and but you can even do it with a small undertaking, because the concept of digital twinning is there. So that's, but there's a lot of complexity involved there. But even a simple thing like a document management system or digital signature, let's say I deal with a lot of contracts and I'm geographically dispersed, that can bring me massive value, you know. So, I mean, I've seen amazing things. I mean, talking about South Africa or Africa, Africa is really at the forefront of mobile. And we've really released amazing mobile applications, and we've really linked the informal and formal sectors through this process. So in terms of economic growth, there's massive opportunities there.
And that also links, I suppose, that's simple things that we all know about M-Pesa. I mean, I've regularly been to Kenya, Ghana, and a lot of those countries, it's almost, there's a seamless interaction. It's also embedded in the culture of the business, I mean, of the society, which I suppose is part of this digital thing, linking the people to the technology.
Exactly. And I know that, for instance, MasterCard did a thing with the spaza shops in Kenya, where they really looked at the analytics on those spaza shops and what they were selling, and then they could advance a line of credit for them because of those analytics. That's a kind of thing in terms of, I mean, there's been amazing innovations, or things like the use of drones across Africa. I mean, they're looking at, I know of a coal mine here outside of Pretoria, which is using drones to evaluate their stockpile of coal. The drone can actually identify the coal and can tell you through the shape of the coal pile what the stockpile is, and that leads into the inventory system, you know. So, I mean, in terms of, I know in the States there's certain guys like BlackRock, they use drones to fly over shopping center car parking areas to see the busyness and the uptake of, you know, what the product sales would be, and they can forecast, and this plays back into the stock exchanges as how well particular companies will be doing. So just in terms, I mean, I ran a project where basically it was mining equipment, and what they were doing is they were using the IoT data off the equipment to measure tolerances. Now, traditionally, that salesperson would go to the mine and try and get an order for a service of that piece of, to service that piece of equipment. And then they would try and propose some kind of products going forward. But now you've got IoT data that tells you that this piece of equipment needs a service at a particular time. And that data is being fed as a lead into a system. So the person can actually, the salesperson sees on the CRM system that there's a lead created. The customer gets the same information. He knows that his equipment requires service. And the salesperson is suddenly having a very different conversation with the customer, because now they have the data, it's reliable data, and they can actually sit with the customer and say, yes, Mr. Customer, I see that this equipment is actually not the piece of equipment that you need. Rather, let's change your product mix, or let's rather hire you this equipment because it's more efficient for your process. So it changes the conversation, it changes the way we interact.
Yeah, and I suppose even with, as you mentioned, with the spaza shops, you know, where payment mechanisms come in, they're starting to also get, you know, product mixes that spaza shops are selling. And so there's a way to integrate that into an inventory system, that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and this is what also e-commerce has brought to the table, is that you get the buying behavior. You get guys, how many items are they just leaving in their shopping carts and why? So, and that analysis happens automatically. And how does it interact with your back-end warehouse, you know? And
we're starting to get a couple of questions coming through, so I don't want to go too far, because these relate to what we've spoken about, and I think this is really important. So please keep the questions coming. A comment here, thanks Ronald, about, you know, Thinking about the unnecessary costs, as I said, to really touch on that, the redundant software. How do you think you could address that kind of thing in an SLA? What would the critical considerations be that you would look at, either in existing contracts or in new contracts?
Okay, well, let's say often you're locked into an existing contract, but you can renegotiate SLAs based on the capability internally. So it might be less expensive to build some of that capability internally, and then you renegotiated the services that you're getting out of that SLA. And remember, often SLAs are there to do maintenance or upgrades on your software and that type of thing. And they should really be feeding back that information to you. You can negotiate knowledge transfers in your SLAs, for instance, and you also want your SLAs to provide you with insights. So you want your SLA to be able to say, where should I be training my people better? And where are my services falling down? And incorporate that. In terms of new contracts, I would say one of the key areas is scalability. So your business might scale up, it might scale down. And your SLA must be able to contract or expand accordingly.
Yeah. Another question, and it's related to the comment around the kind of information within HR systems and building an app. Do you think there's an opportunity for some kind of app that is employee or employer specific? Because the danger of this information is it is also private information. So how does one link some of those concerns, obviously, that the market possibly has?
Okay, the private information is, remember that you can always encrypt certain data on its own. So, for instance, if you're worried about, HIV status or COVID status or things like that, that data is encrypted from your app, that the person might say, I've got these symptoms, they don't know yet, but HR knows that person's not well, and they can start looking at who was in that person's team to start identifying them. So that's key. But definitely there's another level of encryption on HR data.
Yeah. So going back to the art of the possible, any other thoughts or anything in terms of the process? So what process? You've got here spelt out some steps to take.
Yes, so this is really to get your board and your C-level guys exposed to emerging technologies, or just technologies that they haven't been exposed to. I mean, we did that, and we exposed the guys. It was actually amazing, to things like augmented reality and just different technologies. And we just did an overview and discovery sessions on these technologies. So we run discovery sessions with them. And in those sessions, we basically try to do some brainstorming and ideas production. And then we do some what I call funneling. So that's really ideas elimination, because you want that low-hanging fruit at the end of the day, or you want that wow factor, okay? And then from there, you're really creating your use cases, and where do the benefits lie, and understanding the real value that you can capture at the end of the day from this.
I mean, when you say use case, you're essentially saying that if I'm sitting on a board, I need to not just understand what the technology is, but I need to map a picture in my mind of what it's actually going to do to both those prongs of the business system as well as the offering. Because I think that's the danger. We can get mixed up between what is actually out there, people are buying, which we technologize or digitize, versus how it's helping in our business. And obviously those help.
Exactly. So the use case kind of brings it all together. And a nice tool to use there is a storyboard, which makes it nice and simple, because you can be technology, kind of not very literate in terms of technology. And a storyboard will help across the organization just to get the message across. So use case is really saying, what are we using this for, and who's the audience that's going to receive this, and what kind of benefit do we get out of it at the end of the day.
So linking it into our customer segmentation on the external side, but also the employee side, to link into what people need to be trained on, how they use it, how it all integrates.
Exactly. And I mean, we always have, either we're launching something to an external customer, or if we're doing it internally, it's an internal customer, but the process stays fundamentally the same. And then basically the quickest way to onboard people is to develop a prototype. Okay. So I always say, even quicker than that is just a basic mock-up. So I do a mock-up of what this app should look like, or I do a mock-up of what the analytics tool is going to give me, or a mock-up of what this drone is going to do for me. And I build a prototype. And because in each use case, I have certain assumptions. And what I try and do with that prototype is, first of all, I expose all my users, and I get buy-in from the company by getting their input into the prototype. So everybody feels as a team, they've collaborated, they're involved, they've made decisions about the prototype. And that could even be you launching an HR system, and then you want your HR managers to be involved in that, those walkthroughs that you give, and they're going to give their input, And basically, then once we launch it, we do like a proof of concept. And that proof of concept is not to the wider audience, but to a smaller audience, just to prove. We did a very nice proof of concept on the e-commerce platform, just to see what would there be the integration impact on the warehouse. When you suddenly, the products are like flying off the site, and can the warehouse manage it? Can the warehouse manage the storing, putting those certain items aside, and how quickly they have to pick them, and the whole value chain. So that's a nice example.
Yeah, and that, I suppose, speaks to that example that the Ghanaian bank suddenly had more people. So it does look at I know there's a lot of elements here on the slide, but I mean, essentially we're saying we've also then got to look internally and see what we are capable of doing, and what the process involves.
Yes, very, very much so. And I mean, although when we launch a use case, we normally map some kind of process, business process for it, okay? And it may touch on different business processes, but it has its own business process. But within that business process, we also have these kind of silos of capabilities. And all companies need some of these capabilities to launch their digital journey, and we need to understand our gaps. We need to rate ourselves on these gaps, okay? Whether it is how strong is our logistics and supply chain capability, or how, in terms of our ability to integrate systems, is that good enough? So we need to kind of understand these gaps, and with these gaps, we need to ramp up on those gaps. Now, we can either buy in that capability, or outsource that capability, or develop that capability ourselves. That's our choice. But then we create a program where we can ramp up on these things. And some of these things don't change. We always need leadership, we always need a leadership capability from the sponsor to champion the program. And then we also need the C-level support. So often, that's where we get guys on board, and we also say, guys, where do we need to focus from a functional level on IT? Maybe the time is to really up our data security and privacy before we launch some kind of digital road. Sometimes, so we need to agree as management, where do we need to focus, and what are we going to launch, and what are we going to prioritize? And that's kind of fundamental. and that before we go down a road where we can't deliver.
And part of that, I suppose, is when you talk about delivery, it's really thinking that ultimately, and this links back to what's mentioned in King 4 about the fact that ultimately ICT must help us deliver our strategy. And I think one of the opportunities in a crisis is that we can go back to the core principles. ICT, I think, in some businesses has possibly become a distraction, but it's really looking at what really adds value and embeds our brand. Your thoughts?
That's exactly it. So spot on. So in terms of our branding, especially on the customer-facing applications. I mean, I just think of a company like Spur or something like that. I mean, they were amazing. They just, they would get the kids excited they know their happy birthdays, and they use their data so well to incorporate their brand and share their brand. But basically, your brand and your values must be shared on that digital journey. So whatever, if I'm putting an app out there, what is that app saying about me as a company? And if I'm putting a kind of an e-commerce platform up or web page up, and I'm a florist, and I'm making some kind of promise that my flowers are going to be fresh and they're going to last long, I must know that my supply chain is going to be faster than another supply chain. I'm going to have fresher flowers than the next oak. So we have to align things. We can't everything is kind of aligned, and that's when we get real success and we've hit the sweet spot with our customer.
That other example of retailing, and I think there's a lot of information, and obviously we've seen loyalty cards, maybe at a big level it's been used, but we can also think about that in our smaller businesses as well to get people and get data about how people buy.
Yes, I mean, there was immense success with long ago with a German retailer, Ade. It was their most successful project, was really a loyalty card, but they were a savings kind of company, and the on their card they had products where people could get savings and basically capitalize on that. And obviously it gives them one-to-one customer information. They know buying behavior, they can predict it across their 42,000 products, and their stock levels can be reduced, etc., etc. So the point being that the digital customer-facing elements should be based on promise and really express the organizational values.
And I think that's really, I mean, we've worked with lots of businesses in this time to really ask what are the key areas one needs to revisit, and strategy is one of them, and alongside that is strategy and culture and really organizational values. We're seeing the behavior of companies reflect their deep values, and I do think that it's an opportunity, as we've clarified them during this time, to make sure that the systems, the processes, and certainly the digital elements we put in the business reflect those values. And so one of those is the humanization, and I think it's on the next slide, but I think there's an important thing. I had to do something online. It was my sons are now working, and I had to change their status on the medical scheme. And I remember going onto the website, and it was obviously there was a bot. I typed a few questions to the bot. The bot was intelligent enough to know that I probably needed a person, and very quickly it handed me over. And I think that's one of the things we need to think about when we, it's on some of the principles. I don't know, there is the last one, but really humane technology. So going back and re-looking at our principles, your thoughts?
Exactly. I mean, that's fundamental, because ultimately, we as mankind, we don't want to serve technology. Technology must serve us, And ultimately, it's really about not frustrating the clients.
Or our employees.
Or employees, but they're the internal clients. So ultimately, it really is about. Also, that example you gave is a nice example, because they're handed over to the employee. And maybe that employee can be given a bit more authority to be making more intelligent decisions on behalf of the customer to deliver better service. So when we look at technology, often digital gives you better analytics. What does that mean? Your employee must be a little bit more sophisticated and be having the better conversation at the end of the day. So yeah, these principles that we've got to be clear on strategies and objectives from the outset, I think is really key. If we are a smaller organization or medium sized, don't try to do everything yourself, you know. The digital kind of skills out there, they in a sense, that first of all, they're quite scarce. You don't find them everywhere, especially in South Africa, where people are kind of self-taught often. The curriculums aren't, I know they're ramping up these skills in other countries, but South Africa is, in terms of that, could do some work. But there are companies out there that can really help you, and they have really an amazing capability. So stick to, in terms of, if you are launching an e-commerce platform, don't find a company that does everything. Find an e-commerce company that find the specialist, Then in terms of when you are delivering, make sure on your digital journey that you're always linking your business process, your people, and your technology. Now, why do I say business process? You might be fundamentally changing your process. It might be in an enormous leap. So my old process compared to my new one, there you identify how jobs have changed, how roles have changed across the organization. What kind of training does everybody need? What kind of onboarding does everybody need? And then with my new process, I can really measure how effective that process now is. So that business analyst that you used to have, that used to map processes and understand the business, that's quite an important role. And we work across silos. Like I mentioned before, digital curriculums are important. And I said, because your job role has changed, maybe more than 50%, HR needs to work very closely with digital. So their HR strategy becomes important, and how we go forward. And what is our workforce profile going forward, I think what we also do, we want to excite going forward. We want to excite our customer. So that art of the possible, you need to be chatting about that to your customers. And then the other thing too that we haven't mentioned now is the digital architecture. Now that is really, for instance, if I require a certain level of security across all platforms, it's a no-go. I don't get software that doesn't deliver to that level of security. Or if a piece of software cannot integrate to my ERP system, or it can't integrate across the board, we have to set these standards in place to make sure that architecturally this thing is going to work.
And I suppose it's I mean, what we mean there is a lot of that is about pre-thinking the whole process. And sometimes the danger is we build these things iteratively, and then we find out they don't work together, or as you say, they start to get a bit shaky. So really, and especially as a board, we need to be thinking strategy, digital. What are the different elements? And maybe some of it we invest in the next 12 months. Some of it we do the savings now, the investment, but we need to be taking the right steps now, because we do want to reach our destination at the end.
Yeah. So we always need that architectural view with whatever we roll out, because as you say, especially on agile type rollouts, these things are rolled out very quickly and put into the market without thinking of the kind of domino effect across not only the technology stack, in terms of different versions of things. Often if you buy a piece of software, you find out that it needs 5 other pieces of software that need to be on a certain version to run that piece of software. So
Yeah.
these are all things that need to be checked up front to know the total cost of ownership and really get the whole picture.
And the ROI,
understood.
essentially. I mean, we see that
And
with
the
banks.
ROI.
I mean, the big in South Africa, the difference between the old legacy style banks and the newer, more agile ones, a lot of that advantage simply comes from having a more recent technology backbone.
Yes, the newer banks have got a massive advantage, and they're far more stable in terms of our, probably, I don't want to be
A predictor, yeah. But there's certainly the value that they can offer. Yeah, the value they can offer creates that ongoing challenge. So we've got a few minutes left, and I want to just encourage people, if you've got questions in your mind for Eleanor, then please just put them on the group or put them on the chat. Thank you for those. And it's really, tying up and saying, well, then, obviously it ties together in terms of making, make a plan, and I suppose make and implement a plan. What are your thoughts on that? And the key steps, I think, what can people do immediately now?
Yeah, so I think we've spoken about architecture and capability up front, but I think once you've got your digital roadmap going, you must understand that you belong, that everything belongs in a business calendar, and that even your strategy delivers on certain milestones. So you're always aligning with your business calendar and your internal capability, and saying what must you augment in order to make this project happen, okay? And what I like to sometimes be a little bit more conservative on your first digital journey, and make it a successful one to get buy-in from everybody to make the future journeys far more pleasant, and then when you do roll out your digital things, then make it a loud launch. What do I mean by a loud launch? I mean, you've made it, you've made the journey, you've added huge value. I know that Barbarot, I don't know if I'm pronouncing them right, they launched this quite a while back, this tennis racket, this digital tennis racket that that basically could tell you how much topspin, what type of shot you played, and analyzed your game, and could, your trainer could then fix your game up. When they launched, they made a huge launch, and kind of involved the entire tennis world.
Yeah.
So yeah.
There's a good question here from Jared. I mean, he says also, so we want to go loud, and I think it relates exactly to this, Jared. He says, are there any tips you have for getting hesitant or skeptical employees to buy into a selected system or program? I'm going to put a bit of a spin on that and say probably the older style, people who've been in the business a long time. Any thoughts?
So you see there where I said about initially with the collaboration and the employees that, so you'll have certain employees that jump onto a new system and get going, and they're proactive and they get onto it. But they should really be encouraged to sit next to the hesitant ones and take them through it slowly and have patience and be rewarded for it, So you can kind of put rewards in place for that, and make it very accessible. Don't punish people. Don't make it part of their performance indicators. Some people, this is a completely new world for them. And I think the more pleasant the process, the easier it is going to be to launch your other programs going forward.
Yeah, and I think some of the questions also relate, maybe not referring to them directly to some of the, in a sense, there are quite a few short-term opportunities, but actually we need to be thinking about the survival of the business. And so some people, there's obviously lots of people talking about COVID tracking apps. But I think if one thinks about that, one has to ask the question, does it fit into our longer term strategy? If we can leverage it in the short term to get us somewhere, that's great. But I think we can also, we need to have a steady head and steady hands. Your last thoughts, Eleanor?
Yeah, I think, so basically with the support of your board and the sponsor, they must work with your project management who can really onboard your management team and the exco and align everything internally and externally. So your program manager and project manager becomes key in really making sure all these components are aligned.
Mm.
And they really have the mandate from the Exco, and they're a very skilled individual who make sure that this process is driven forward and the goals are achieved. And you do need that kind of capability to make sure something like this is successful. So I think just going forward, it's great to do some kind of discovery workshop where one can work out a digital strategy for your company, and to really point you in the right direction, because we're all in a different place. Some of us are very advanced, some of us it's the beginning of our journey. And I think Sadar can really help in terms of that respect.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thanks so much for your time and your expertise, because I do think it's asking the right questions. It's talking about what are we going to do in response to, or as a result of, or to take into account the pandemic and the crisis we're going through.
Exactly.
And I think that's part of it. It's part of that journey that we're going on. So thank you all for participating. Thanks very much for taking the time on a Friday afternoon for most of you. And I think if you're needing to answer any of these questions, if you're needing to take the next steps, please get hold of us. We have access not just to digital experts, but through our network. And we work at board level, and it's about the decision making. So there's some contact details. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful weekend. Please do fill in the evaluation form that is going to pop up as soon as I close the webinar. And I'm just double checking for any last questions. Thank you for the comments, and I trust that you have a good time. Please stay safe, please stay healthy. Don't do anything crazy, as we all want to do after 40 or 50 days of lockdown. Have a good one.
Yes,
Cheers.
thank you.
Bye.
Bye.